Homeroom. My name is Brennan Wright. Joining me again is my co-host Aaron Hockey, and today we have a very special guest, the president of NRG Esports and the San Francisco Shock, Brett Lautenbach. Lautenbach, right?
Lautenbach. Yeah,
Lautenbach.
you're good. That's perfect.
I got it. I butcher names a lot, so I like to double check.
It's the signature of this show.
Signature of the show. Me butchering names throughout the entire thing.
All good. All good.
Yeah, but how are you doing today?
Wonderful. Happy to be on here. Thanks for having me, guys. This is exciting.
Welcome. We're excited to have you. If you guys in the stream were here for episode 1, so not the previous episode, but the one before, 2 weeks ago, you know that we had a couple college recruiters on. We talked about recruiting in colleges, how that process went, and what they really did there. We thought we'd mix things up. We thought we'd bring in some perspective from the professional side, see how they do recruiting, and just get a perspective on that angle versus the college side, so you guys can really compare and contrast, ask your questions. So really, just the first thing going into, Brett, is can you just give like a quick, just general rundown of how the recruiting process is for an organization like an NRG or San Francisco?
Yeah, absolutely. So it, somewhat title dependent, because every title kind of has a different system for how ladders work and everything like that, and kind of where you're looking at new talent versus certain games. It's a much bigger risk to find a diamond in the rough or somebody who's not had that competitive experience. But I'll just take SF Shock for a quick example and kind of how we recruited through that process. And one of the interesting things about Overwatch League in general, and when I was explaining it to a lot of people who have no understanding of esports at all, and kind of how monumental it was for this league to get off the ground, I would say, imagine if tomorrow every player in the NFL was suddenly a free agent and you could go pick whoever you wanted. That's pretty much what the 12 teams in Overwatch League were given. So for us, we kind of looked at it from the perspective of what type of team do we want to build. And from a recruiting perspective, that helps us color in what sort of player we're going to go after. So you have certain teams who said, hey, we want a 12-man roster, like London Spitfire. Or us, we were like, hey, we want to probably keep it a little smaller and scrappier. We really only have 6 people eligible to play right now. 2 will be eligible to play later in the year. So by nature of us saying, hey, we wanted to run with this smaller, kind of tighter roster at first, for us, we said, all right, that means we need players who are very flexible across multiple roles. So that was our key indicator for every type of player we were going to go after. We opened up kind of the floodgates looking at anywhere between 60 and 70 people who kind of came in for tryouts for SF Shock. And we just ran an open tryout process there. Now, that's a blessing for us because everyone was doing the same thing around the same time. We were a little bit early on starting our process. But when you look at other games, maybe like Rocket League, which we're involved in, you're probably not running through some sort of massive open tryout scenario. You're probably looking at guys who may already be signed to another team, and their contract is coming up, or you're looking to buy them out, or you're looking at players who are just grinding it out on the ladder that, our guys or our scouts happen to notice and say, hey, this guy is consistently winning matches. We picked up Justin pretty much our most recent Rocket League edition because he was a monster on the ladder and our players kept running into him. And we're like, how is this kid not signed? We need to go talk to him. We need to see who he is. We need to kind of figure out if he's willing to play pro, and then we brought him in for some trials.
Great. I kind of had a question, just expanding on what you said. You mentioned that you had a tryouts for Overwatch. You had like 60 other people that were kind of in your perspective, or
Yeah.
prospective, sorry. What does that tryout process look like?
Oof. At first we did the thing that everyone starts doing, which is really, in hindsight, stupid, but, I think everyone goes through the learning process, which is we would, have this big list of players we wanted to look at, and we'd find our 6 ones we wanted the most, and we'd put them together, and then we'd go scrim an existing team. And we kind of quickly realized, well, shoot, if we're going to spend every day getting 6 new players in, and some days you're going to see people more than once, it's going to take a lot of days and possibly a lot of months to get through this whole list. So that doesn't make any sense. So we looked at it from that perspective and said, well, this is dumb. We should just open it up to 12 guys at a time and run in-houses. So what we did is we started just bringing in 12 guys, made sure we fit all of our roles and all of our heroes that we wanted to see based on where we thought the meta was, where the meta might go. And we had, not only our coach and our coaching staff, so an additional, we had 3 people in there, plus a few guys that we were just kind of using on a volunteer basis as scouts and people who just want to be a part of the process, whose opinions we trusted, all looking at every angle of every, match, and then saying, all right, well, this 6, is clearly a stacked 6. It's way too powerful. What if we take one guy off here and move it to this one, which, maybe there might be a few weak points here, and just started moving people around a bit into different hero positions and into different rosters until we could really grind people out. And you could see, hey, this guy seemed really, really good, but he only seemed really, really good because he was playing with 4 other guys who were making him pretty much invincible and just helping him out every step of the way. And without that sort of exact support, this guy actually isn't that good. And that's a huge, huge aspect of it is you have to look at these guys within the context of where they are, especially when you're looking at players on other teams. We often get like false positives for people who might seem like they're for some reason on an ungodly talent level beyond somebody else, and they really might not be. They might be similar to a person on another team. It's just their team happens to rotate or play around them in a particular way that makes them seem and allows them to do things that no one else is being allowed to do.
Awesome. And just going on real quick, you mentioned an open tryout. Is there anything preliminary to that? Any requirements before anybody can just jump in and start trying out? Like, can anybody just show up and try, or do you actually screen through and say, all right?
Yeah, we screen. We definitely screen. We pretty much, especially with Overwatch League, one of the difficult parts of it is you had a lot of guys who had been in the competitive system for so long who ultimately didn't make Overwatch League, and it sucks to see. It's never fun. When you have guys who've been grinding out a game for a year and a half and suddenly their competitive career kind of comes to a jarring halt. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot of those guys get picked up in mid-season pickups in OWL, a lot of those guys getting picked up for contenders teams, et cetera, et cetera. But there is definitely a screening process. It's not like every Joe Schmo who happens to, think, oh, I'm just stuck in plat tier. I really should be a grandmaster. I know we've all heard that before.
All the time.
Yeah. So we're not just kind of digging around. We do look at, where people's stats are on ladder, how they've done historically on ladder, have they had competitive experience on other teams. And that's important because, like, frankly, in certain games, my biggest issue there's even games we compete in that are like this, we get as team owners and as people working on team side, we get this habit of thinking, well, if they're not on a team right now, there's a reason they're not on a team right now. And that's not always the case. There are plenty of really, 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 really talented guys who, for whatever reason, have been overlooked because of timing, circumstance, location, age, what have you, or maybe they just didn't gel with a certain set of players, so nobody ever picked them up because that set of players said this guy sucks. You always want to make sure you're not closing yourself off to those types of players. Brad, our head coach for the Overwatch League team, when he was back running Selfless back in the day, he has this story about scoping out, DeFran being this guy who was just like killing people. Like, he kept seeing him on other people's streams, showing up in the kill feed, just getting monster kills. And no one was picking this guy up. And he was like, how is nobody noticing this guy? He's on every European player stream causing absolute havoc. And so, he spent 2 weeks desperately trying to get in touch with him. And DeFran just like wasn't responding to anything. And like finally, after like 2.5 weeks of Brad like finding his stream, tipping his stream, sending him DMs, trying to just get him to respond, he finally, was like, oh, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were trying that hard to get in touch with me. And Brad was like, it's been 2 weeks, man. I've messaged you multiple times every day, and then, ended up signing him. So you look at guys like that. I mean, like, there are people who just, for whatever reason, they get passed over or looked over. And I think, from our team perspective side, it's always in our best interest to try and keep an open mind when we look at players like that.
Yeah, and I see that all the time. I personally follow Counter-Strike more than Overwatch. I've been getting into the Overwatch League. I mean, you see people like Stewie2K in Counter-Strike. He was only in Pugs. You see Cloud9 pick him up, and they just want to major with him. So, I mean, the hidden talent out there, it's there, but I mean, it's definitely hard to come by.
He's a prime example, and like, God bless Jack for picking him up. Like. That's a kid who I think when they picked him up, everyone said this is the dumbest thing that Cloud9's ever done. It's toxic. They got skewered for it. And, Jack runs a really tight program over there. And, I think Jack looked at it and said, look, this kid has the talent. Maybe with my personal, pushing on him and the type of system we built here, we can turn him into something. And, obviously he has to buy into it, and he has to be willing to dedicate his life and, all of his time to it. And he did. And now they're a major winning team. So, it definitely worked out.
Yeah.
He's a good example of why you should always be open to those things.
Oh, yeah. And just real quick, a viewer question just came in asking, are you guys looking to hire some of the free agents that used to be pros? I assume regarding to Overwatch League? Or is it just looking at whatever's out there right now, just taking through the talent pool?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the talent pool, obviously the first people that come up are the guys who have been pros in the past, just because they're usually first on mind, just because we know about them. They have a tangible record we can look at. There's a lot of people who know them that we can kind of dig around about. We can say, hey, is this guy really this good, or is this guy really this bad? How are they to work with? Are they good? Were they a good locker room type of player, which is always important to us. We want somebody who's we think we can mold into the system. So those are usually the people we start looking at, and the people who kind of come through the system in terms of checking out first. But the big key and distinction is always to not just stop there. As I said, it's always going beyond. So we've been looking at a lot of those guys. We'll be announcing, and we also just kind of got into contenders, which will be launching in March, and we're announcing our team next week for that. And we did a lot of looking at guys who've been in the tier 2 or pre-OWL tier 1 team landscape. So that stuff's super important.
Really? Now, just going off that, do you think that since the pros are out there or ex-pros who do have that track record, who have that portfolio, do you think that limits those who haven't been in the professional scene but have talent out there? Do you think that how much harder do you think it makes it for these amateur players who don't really have that big portfolio behind them to actually make it and push into the next level to becoming a pro?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, definitely. I think the biggest thing I would say to people who don't have that track record, or when you're looking for that kind of experience, is start forming teams for the open. The beautiful thing about Overwatch, they've done a really, really good job at, and I would give Blizzard a ton of credit, is they are looking at this as a top-down system of Overwatch. Not only do we want to have an Overwatch League, we want to have a Contenders Farm League, we want to have an open division below that, so that way we're constantly surfacing up new talent, because like I said, there's plenty of games we're in where we're just not good at doing that, and it's not just on a team side, it's on every angle of its side. We just people aren't paying attention to the developmental leagues, and Overwatch has tried, Blizzard has tried to do a good job of making it easy to follow all of those different track records, to try and put them with some sort of kind of connective tissue between each one. And I think that's the key, is people will take a chance on you if you've never been on a team before, but it definitely is a bigger risk, and there's a lot more questions that go into it. We've picked up players in the past who don't have huge stage presence time. You look at somebody like Sleepy, who plays on flex support for us. He's a rock star. I love Sleepy. He's absolutely incredible. And that's a guy who, he didn't have any major stage presence prior to joining us. He had done online tournaments and things like that, but you look at those guys, and there's a lot of GMs, and I think a lot of coaches, who would overlook somebody because they say, hey, we don't know how he's going to perform when he gets on stage in front of 500 people, 1,000 people, and there's 200,000 people watching him online. I think you can try and coach through those things, and that's what you try to do, and you try to find people who have the mental fortitude that they're not going to be that much different between their ladder and online stats versus being on an actual LAN client.
All right.
So I kind of had a question I was kind of holding on to for a little bit. So correct me if I'm wrong. The average age of an Overwatch League player is 20, 19?
I think it's
is that right, Brennan?
21, I think, was the stat.
21.
I can pull it up for you.
Yeah, that's probably right.
What are the educational levels when people are coming into these teams? Are they high school students coming out of high school? Are they college students that are playing Overwatch? I'm just curious.
Yeah, we actually have a wide variety there, just because we have, I think, might have the widest age range out of any team in the league. You've got on the one end guys like Dak and IDDQD, who are seasoned pros and seasoned veterans. We have some college educated kids on the team as well. But then you have folks as young as Sinatra and Super, who are both 17 and are both finishing high school online right now. And that's a huge, 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 huge undertaking, right? It's something I know when we were recruiting Super specifically, spent a lot of time talking to his dad about it. Like his dad is a college professor. He very much values his son's education, and was like, hey, like this is pretty nerve wracking for us because like he's going to go have to finish. He's at a good high school right now. He's going to have to finish online, which is going to be a little bit different. Like eventually, we do want him to go to college. And, I said to him like, look, I don't want to. I'm not going to tell you anything that's not true. Like it's going to be tough for him to finish online courses. He's going to have to be really dedicated. I mean, fortunately, Super is a very dedicated guy, so he is finishing his online courses. But like, he's going to have to put in the time, and it's going to be, we will help and we'll give him every space and every resource we possibly have to make sure he does this to the best of his ability. But it's a huge decision away. We're pulling him out of your lives at home at a pretty intense age of 17 to 18, which is when most kids are looking at college experience and things like that. He's going to be dedicating his life to being a pro. Now, he also happens to be an incredibly intelligent guy, and I have no doubt in my mind that he'll get into whatever college he decides he wants to go to when he ultimately decides to retire from pro Overwatch and go do that. But I think, you look at kind of education as one of those things where it's totally dependent on the individual. There's people who can go through college and they can have a whole college education and it doesn't really do them any good. And there's some people who you can tell it's worked wonders for them and helps them be a better player and helps them, be a better person around the team. It's very much a case by case basis when we're looking at that. We try not to evaluate too heavily ever on like, oh, this person's education level is here or there. What I tell everyone is like, it's good to have an education. So, try to get it. And if you want to put your life on hold to go be a pro player, for your education on hold to go be a pro player, do it, because your education will still be there as long as you're willing to work for it, past your pro career life. Like you can go do these things. And I think one of the big things for the organizations like ourselves is to, try and give up as many resources as we can to help that happen for players.
Now that probably debunks one of the big things that with when you look at what parents think, a lot of them, at least from my experience and what I've heard, a lot of them think that kids going pro, these organizations are only out there for the money. They will shark these kids out of high school, college, no matter where they are, if they're good. And then, based on what you're saying, that just sounds completely not true.
No, I mean, like weirdly enough, like I think we disagree with other teams on about a billion different things as they disagree with on us. Like we all talk about what's going on in the industry. We all know each other. But I think every single team I've ever spoken to is like, education is incredibly important. And like, I think every team out there is at some stage looking at, how can I partner with a university or college or a local market university or college, because I want to be able to like make sure my players can eventually assimilate into that or understand what college is like. I think it's super important for all of us. We don't want to be a detriment in a player's long-term life and everything, because the fact of the matter is, I mean, while I think the age, as we get smarter about how players train and compete, that end date age will continue to go higher and higher. It's always going to have a cap out. No one's going to be able to be a pro gamer for their entire life. It's just not possible.
Well, look at somebody like Taz right now. I mean, he was a great player, but right now he's getting, most of Virtus Pro actually on the Counter-Strike side. Those guys are getting older. And they used to be amazing, and now 0-3 out of a major. So
yeah, it's tough, and there's not always, not everyone is cut out to end up working in esports after they retire as a pro, and there's not infinite jobs in esports to go around for pros who retire. So, as I say, you should always be thinking about that next step, and kind of what comes next after the life of a pro. And I think the industry as a whole has gotten a lot better at trying to help make sure we're being more helpful to players in that regard.
Awesome.
So a question that I had, you kind of mentioned like the college scene and sort of having your players realize that there is a path after esports if they burn out, if they can't participate in esports anymore. Do you ever see it reversing a bit where you'll be recruiting out of college in the future, or is that like nowhere to be seen in the near future?
I don't know. It's interesting. I think, there's guys who will it's tough. It's one of those things where I think there will be people in the future who will go compete on the collegiate level, who will forego an early esports career to get their college career started. We haven't seen a ton of it yet, but I'm certain that that's coming at some point in time. Right now, the big problem with it is a lot of players who are in that like 17, 18-year-old range are, looking at this as like their absolute prime moment in esports, and therefore they'd rather be on the highest stage making the most money at that moment and deferring college. But I can definitely see in the future that there's going to be players of the opposite mindset who sit there and say, hey, look, if I can keep honing my skills throughout college, I want to go get 2 years of college out of the way, or just start my college career and do a year and then kind of come back and finish it out later. I can definitely see that being a possibility.
Now, do you think
Gotcha. Sorry, this is just expanding upon the question a little bit more. Where does the college scene need to be in order to promote education first and then going into the pro scene, like how you kind of explained?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, probably, it's tough to say. It's going to be dependent on those like kind of individual universities. I think, like you look at people like Maribel and RMU and things like that. Like those schools have done such a good job of helping players be balanced on a educational level, helping them on a competitive level. Yeah. And I think you'll see guys come out of that stuff and want to go pro and able to do so. I think those are probably great models for kind of what the future probably looks like. I think it's been really cool, looking at schools like Cal who've gotten heavily involved. They've got a great Overwatch program there. I think you'll kind of continue to see more people pick up on the styles that those few groups have kind of implemented. But I think it's also, right now it's just the nature of esports being esports. People like young talent, and young talent can pretty much find if they're good, a pretty high salary. And it's always going to be that question of, do I want the money now or the education now? And how do I push and pull on each of these two things?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about, you definitely see it in the future. I mean, do you think you can put any kind of time step on it? Like how long do you think it's going to be till we actually see the college competitive field really starting to become to a level where, professional teams would start to look into it?
Yeah, it's tough for me to put a time and date on it. I think probably not too far in the future you'll see at least that guy happen. If it, and if in my ignorance it has already happened that somebody's recruiting off of the college teams for kind of top tier pro T1 esports, please feel free to correct me, because I apologize if I missed that. It's entirely possible that I have, but I think in next few years you'll see that happen. You'll find somebody who just kind of really started hitting in college and was on one of those teams, and we'll end up ourselves or somebody else will end up recruiting them.
Yeah.
Do you think amateurism will come into play if the NCAA steps in to regulate collegiate esports, and they have their amateurism rules? Would that kind of encourage kids to move through the college scene first?
Maybe on some level. I think, again, it'll be one of those cases of it depends on what the offering is. I think when you look at the kind of college aspect of it, it's going to depend on a ton of variables dependent to like that individual player.
Gotcha.
How important that is to get it done, to get that education done now versus later, how confident they feel in themselves to be able to revert to going to college later if they want to defer, how possible it is for them to stay relevant and continue to hone their craft at the highest level if they go to college. Because I mean, obviously that's when their concern is if you're, a star player who's 17 years old, no matter what game you're in, if you go to college and something like, let's look at an Overwatch League, for example, where these guys need to be housed in near the studio and they're 24 hours a day, you can't do both. And then you have to kind of look at that concern of like, all right, if I go to college right now, am I going to lose ability to play at this high level without being it out with the best of the world every day? And that's going to be the big wagering factor, right? Certainly some guys will still be able to be the best in the world at the system, but you do have to wager that risk.
And here's a question to ask now is, do you think that, now that these college programs are starting to build up and you're seeing some of these schools build up these massive programs, they're starting to have some decent incentives for these players, could you see maybe in the future, these colleges being able to recruit kids in to build a team that could potentially compete on the same level as some of these professional teams, compete alongside them? Because as of right now, where we don't have an NCAA or NIA group coming in and regulating like that, I mean, they're allowed to compete in the same leagues as everybody else. Do you think that with enough incentive, we could be seeing colleges pick up enough players that could potentially put them on the board with pros?
It depends on where salaries continue to go for depending on the game. Like, I mean, if you're a top tier CS:GO player, I mean, you're going to sit there and say, all right, like what's the average cost of this scholarship of going to this college versus how much money I can actually make just, if you sit there and say, I can go to this college whenever I want, your big question is going to be, does getting this college education for free right now and a full ride scholarship make me more money than the, how many ever thousands of dollars a month I'm going to make going to be a pro? And that'll be kind of the cost benefit analysis that I think you'll see a lot of players have to make if the incentive continues to grow there for, that. And again, there's going to be a lot of personal things that kind of go into that. A lot of people, especially in America, we value our college experience at a certain age, at a certain level, and saying, hey, I want to be able to be 18 and stupid in college as opposed to going to college when I'm 28 and a little bit more mature. Those are the kind of life choices that I think players will make on an individual basis, and it's tough for me to say, like, oh, for sure, like, definitely they're all going to turn down college and decide to go back later. I mean, some might and some might not.
All right.
Are there any like current regulations within the Overwatch League preventing you on like how you recruit, how you obtain new recruits, different things like that?
Yeah, so we have, obviously a roster cap at 12, obviously a minimum roster at 6. There's, also particular signing windows we have to abide by. So there was a signing window going into season 1 where we had a set amount of months that you could make offers to players that closed, and you had to have your team finalized by then. And right now we're in the kind of mid-season pickup window that opened up a few weeks ago. Where we can make trades, we can, buy out players' contracts from other teams if they agree to them. We can also go pick up free agents, and that will end. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but early April, and then it will be, back to steady state until the end of season 1. In which case, teams can, enact their extensions on agreements with existing players, decide to drop players. Or, go pick up new players. I mean, that's one of the cool things I think that Blizzard did and Activision Blizzard pulled off in building this league was give some stability to pro players as they're entering the league and saying that you have a guaranteed 1-season contract. So you're not going to be dropped after 2 weeks. And that puts us as ownership groups in a position to really, really think through the sort of pickups we're making. You can't just be haphazard about picking somebody up in the hopes that it'll work out, because no matter what, you're locked to them for a year. You're providing their housing, they're your employee, you're providing their salary for a year. There's no way around that. So it definitely makes you consider a lot of different things in terms of recruiting those players.
So does that create a different recruiting landscape when you go to recruit for something like San Francisco Shock versus when you're recruiting for just a regular NRG team? Is it more thorough? Is it more, what's the difference when recruiting for those two teams?
Yeah, definitely. I think when you look at it from your perspective, it makes you a little bit more risk averse. With other teams that we are in and other games we're in, your contract isn't guaranteed. If you can't cut it, if you can't hack it, there's outs. There's ability for contracts to be terminated. There's abilities for us to just trade you off at any point in time or sell you out at any time. You can be a little bit more risky. You can pick up the guy who's never played pro before and hope it works out. That makes it a much riskier endeavor to do that on the Overwatch League side of thing, where you're looking at players. You want to make sure that, okay, this player is a sure thing. They are going to work out for us. And obviously, that's never always the case. Nothing is ever a sure thing, but you want to kind of feel like it is if you're signing a player. You don't want to take big leaps and risks on guys you think are going to flame out.
And just another question from the viewers here. Toby the Awesome is asking, what sort of practice regimen, just to take a bit of a turn here, are the pros on right now? So when you look at a pro team, what is their practice schedule like?
So I'll speak to Overwatch League first, and it's pretty similar, I think, for the rest of the guys. It just depends on the variance and of how long matches take. But our guys do about 2 major scrim blocks that are about 2.5 hours a day against different teams. Sometimes they tick up to 3. We usually try to have a hour break in between if we can. If we can't, we don't. But the day kind of starts with a team meeting led by coaches, sitting with the guys, talking about, what they're going to be running in terms of compositions that day, what to be looking out for in the opposing team that we're scrimming, things that they should be focusing on in terms of, what calls we're making and things like that. Usually we try to, after each block, digest a little bit about what went right, what went wrong. Did we do the things that we said we were going to work on? How well did we execute those? We kind of grade them on a scale. And, then at the end of the day, the guys go home and most of them continue to grind. They'll either hop on ladder, they'll watch a VOD. It really, most players treat this as a 24-hour a day thing. They're not going home and just sitting in front of the couch watching TV. They're going home and studying the game more. I think when you're talking about, the best 100 to 150 players in the world in Overwatch that are in Overwatch League, that's just the kind of person you're probably signing when you sign somebody. You're not signing somebody who's very casual about the game, right? They're pretty much spending every waking moment dedicated to this game and this game alone. Of course, they have their other games. Half our team loves playing RuneScape, so they like to kind of cool off with a little bit of RuneScape in their life. But it definitely is. It's 100% full time. I mean, we only dictate a certain amount of that practice, but we know that the players are going to continue working on it afterwards.
And do you think that sort of a training regimen and practice regimen would be good for maybe a college or level team or a team that even looking at us in HSEL? Do you think that's something like that would be good for them to follow, or do you think something a little bit different would benefit them more, speaking generally?
Yeah. I mean, I think even just generally, obviously when you're in high school or college, you have a lot of other responsibilities you have to weigh, so you can't do as much. But I think, the big key, I think, for any practice, and, whether or not you have a coach or not, if it's just a 6 stack of guys, or depending on the game, 5 stack, looking at a scrim or a practice and really setting out to find goals that aren't win or lose, that are, hey, our comms about, our ult comms are really crappy. We're not reading where their ult charge is regularly impressively. We have no idea that we're walking into a junk tire when it's a junk tire. That's a goal for today. Literally, I know it sounds basic, but the amount of times I've seen teams that don't set those sort of goals for themselves, that don't look at those small intricacies and say, hey, these are the things we need to work on, or don't come in saying, hey, this is the type of strategy we don't normally run that we want to try and run, and we're going to do it. That's a huge thing. I've seen a ton of teams and players who they treat scrims and practices as it's a win, so that was a good practice, and if it was a loss, it was a bad practice, and that's just not a good way to kind of measure yourself, because those wins and losses don't really mean anything anyway.
All right, and then just going back to try to full circle it real fast. Going back to recruiting, looking more along the sides of the energy side, since I know you do have the SF Shot guys locked into those big contracts. So with an NRG and another pro team, you have the ability to drop the players. So how do you guys deal with players who aren't really living up and really having to make roster changes, especially if it's something like a mid-season change?
Yeah, I mean, I think we try to be pretty candid with the players on our team as it's kind of coming. Usually I think players know, if they're not executing, they hear about it. Especially if it's they're just not putting in the time thing, they'll definitely hear about it, because the other players on the team will complain. That's when we get a little bit more hands-on with certain things, where we're saying hey, if you're not putting in the time, this is kind of your warning. We want to work with you. What can we do to help you make sure you're putting in the time? Is there something we can help out with? What's happening? Why is this not working? If it's just a skill thing, again, it's about having those regular conversations and saying, all right, what can we do? Is another coach, something, an extra analyst going to help? Is it going to be, getting more one-on-one time with the coach, or with an analyst, or bringing in a sports psych or something like that? We want to find solutions before it gets to the point of, hey, you're fired. And then when it becomes a case of, hey, you're fired, we're pretty stern on saying, we want to help those people if we think that they actually are. I mean, we've rarely had players who we've released because they're just frankly not putting in the time, or just being lazy. And if that were the case, it's hard for me to recommend them to other teams. But if it's a player who I think just isn't working in the system we've built for whatever reason, which has happened before. We have players who are extremely talented, but for whatever reason, the team has just kind of changed around them and plays a different style of game. We'll actively go out and talk to other team owners and say, hey, look, this guy's coming off our roster. We want to help him find a good home. Are you guys looking for somebody? He's going to be available. Those are important things for us to do, just because I think it's good for the well-being of the space that people are always kind of thinking that way. But that's a huge part of it.
So that kind of led me just into my next question. I think you answered it pretty much almost entirely there. Is it more common to just have these players, if it does come to the point where they're removed from the roster, is it more common for them to end up going into free agency, or do they generally end up in another team relatively quickly with the assistance of you guys?
It depends. If sometimes it's there's a lot of variables that go into it. If it's a good player who we think has ability to be somewhere else, sometimes we'll keep them under contract and try to sell them off to another team and say, hey, look, we're going to charge you X amount and you can buy the remainder of this person's contract. And usually we're obviously talking with the players throughout that process, so we're not sending them somewhere that they don't want to be, because the worst thing for a player is to just be sold off to somebody and yeah, right, exactly. So there's usually a mutual agreement that kind of goes into that conversation. In the event that we can't do that, and in the event that we also can't place them anywhere for free, we will put them into a total free agency. It's a total dependent on the player's skill level and kind of where the market is. So, sometimes you release a player simply just because there happens to be a player who's a lot better than them that's a free agent or available to pick up. And it's to no real fault of theirs other than, hey, there was a better guy. There was a better option at that time. And in those cases, usually those are the players that we know are good enough to be on our teams. They're probably good enough to be on other teams. So there's probably a market out there for them, at least, if not as a sell, as a free agent.
Yeah, and I go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, I was just going to read a viewer question if you wanted to expand upon that. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions in terms of my eyes and what I see and people yelling on Reddit every time anything happens. Probably one of the biggest misconceptions is that people think that whenever a player is dropped from a roster, they always think it's because they're always just not living up to the expectations and they're just not skilled, when in reality a lot of times, Kiyoshima is probably a really good example of this, is that it's not always just a skill. It's mixed with the team if they work well with the players. So I think that's another thing that people really just don't understand.
Yeah, if you have people here who listen or who follow Rocket League at all, we had Jacob on our team for 2 years, who was a rock star player, and he's incredible, and he plays a very specific type of Rocket League that our team just started to move away from. So we went and found a kid who kind of played that, and Jacob has moved on since. And it's not because Jacob's bad. He's great. He's still an incredible star player. He just won a 1v1 tournament. It's just it didn't fit this type of program we had anymore.
All right, so you ready for my question?
Do it.
Beametry OW says, firstly, I want to thank you for being here with us. This is really fascinating. I was wondering what was the biggest challenge you had while creating the team? Additionally, how did you get the funds to pay for the initial cost to participate in the OWL?
Yeah, so for the OWL side, so just for some background on me, so I joined Energy about 2 months ago. So Energy had been around for about a year. I joined pretty much right after the relegation from League of Legends. And in that time, when I had joined on board, was very into Overwatch and had kind of, heard about what Overwatch League was going to be like. And there was a lot of challenges, I think, that went into kind of building that roster. But chronologically, the raising of the money for that initial investment, it was a lot of going around and doing pitches with different investors, from celebrities and athletes like Shaquille. Obviously Shaquille was a major backer of ours, but obviously we added in Jennifer Lopez. A-Rod came back in, Marshawn Lynch, Michael Strahan. Fortunately, we have an incredible board and an incredible CEO, Andy Miller, who is one of our founders, who has spent most of his life starting companies, selling them, turning them into very successful properties. So this is like right in his wheelhouse, and he really led the charge on this. And I think it was, at first we were like, wow, it's going to be I'm not going to say it was easy, but it's going to be really, 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 really hard to raise this money. I think, once we started getting some traction going, we found, oh, wow, there's a lot of people who are really, really starting to believe in what this esports thing is, and doubly so really believing in what Overwatch League is going to be. So I think we found enough of those folks pretty early on who are very interested in helping us raise the money for that. Obviously, it's a large investment, so it's a lot of money and it's a lot of people to hit up, but we're super thankful for those people, and it's not like they're just writing a check and walking away. They're regular advisors to everything we do in this space. When it comes to kind of starting the team and that whole process, it's crazy. It's absolutely mind-blowing that it was only a few months ago that we went through that. Like I said, it's a massive undertaking to sit there and look at the entire scope of player base across every region in Overwatch and say with any amount of confidence that these are the 9 players who are going to be the best players. You have to, believe in yourself that you got the guys who are going to be the best players. But it's definitely a very bullish task to say you can do that. And we're super excited with kind of how things have landed. Obviously, I think our split 1 performance was a little lackluster, and we've changed a lot of things and done a lot of things in how we operate to help hopefully turn that around for split 2 in Overwatch League. But it was a monumental undertaking that took just about every ounce of energy and brain power for every single person in this organization. Not just myself. This isn't like a one-man show here by any stretch of the imagination. We have incredible GMs, an incredible GM with Derek. We've got an incredible CEO with Andy. We've got awesome gaming managers, awesome media folks, awesome coaches, and a host of awesome volunteers who helped out throughout that whole process.
That's great. Another viewer question from, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Begins with a J.
I think.
How feasible is it for someone to be picked up out of something like HSEL by a pro team?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely feasible if you start making a name for yourself. I think, the big thing I always say for people, depending on the game you're playing, if you have the ladder stats to back up the tournament stats, it usually sings well. We've signed 2 high school guys in Overwatch League, so it's not out of the realm of possibility for that level to be picked up from. It's just usually one of those things where there's so much that goes into choosing those type of any player. It's never tournament performance. It's also ladder. It's also what I always call the "is this person crazy" test, which is usually the phone call I do with them. Just kind of gauging on how their mental aspect is, and do I think this person's going to be easy to work with? Do I think they fit the kind of general makeup of the rest of the team? I mean, we've been incredibly fortunate that I think if you go through our Overwatch League roster, every single one of those guys is also actually friends in real life. They love hanging out together.
That's great.
They really are a band of brothers. And that's because we recruited for that. We recruited for guys who would want to grind and dig in and give everything they had for this thing and for each other.
Yeah, that's really important. Another viewer question, Toby the Awesome. What does it take to break into the esports industry, not necessarily as a player, but as an analyst or a coach?
A lot of time and a lot of effort. The big thing, you got to be willing to give up most of your time, if not all of it. This has to be something you're incredibly passionate about. I always say, volunteering first is probably the easiest pathway in. Like I said earlier, we've had plenty of people who've staff volunteered for us throughout scouting processes before, and it's as simple as handing them an NDA and saying, okay, great, you're part of this now. You're not going to get paid. It sucks, but if this goes well, hopefully there's, if not a paid opportunity here, hopefully a paid opportunity somewhere else. We can be a reference for you, and that's a huge opportunity. And if you put in the time and work, I mean, I'll tell you, there's no shortage of people who want to work in this space. The big thing is putting in the time and putting in the effort and doing every individual small task as though it's the most important task in the world is probably the way you get noticed the best.
Exactly I think Brennan can speak to that.
I started casting and interning here, and now I'm a production manager and league administrator. So, I mean, volunteering is a fantastic way to get into it. I can definitely speak to that.
Yeah. Put in the hard work, and people will notice.
Like 100%.
Any other viewer questions out there?
I think we've
Not
pretty
seeing
much gone
anything.
through all of our content, I think.
Do you have any further questions, Brennan?
I think that's it for me. I'm looking through the notes. I think we've pretty much touched on
Yeah.
everything. So,
Awesome.
oh, Toby the
All
Awesome,
right.
give me a sec. Do you have it now, man? I can be. We're not gonna sit here and idle. If you have a question, ask it now.
Speak now, forever hold your peace.
And of course, you can tweet to us. We can try to answer as many questions as we can off stream. We're always in our Discord, so be sure to stop in, ask us questions. But yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing any more viewer questions. That's it. I think we're pretty much going to be wrapping it up. Oh,
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys having me on. This was fun.
yeah, no, I mean, we definitely appreciate you coming on. Gives us and the viewers an awesome perspective on. Oh. No, okay. It gives us an awesome perspective on the Overwatch League and professional side of things. Yeah, we had, like I said, episode 1, we had the college recruiters coming in, so it's really nice to get the perspective of the professional side of the SF Shock NRG. So it was really great talking to you.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. All right, yeah, guys, that is going to be the end of the show today. If you did enjoy, be sure you hit the follow button. If you're feeling very generous, we have a Twitch button to have some awesome emotes. My favorite being oof, although the one, of my face, everybody enjoys that one, of course. But yeah, again, Brett, thank you for coming on. I believe we can find you at NRG_BrettBox, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh yeah, Energy Brettbox on Twitter. You can also follow Energy Esports at NRGGG and the San Francisco Shock at SF Shock on Twitter. Definitely recommend checking them out. Follow them in Overwatch League. I know I love watching them play. It is very fun to be able to watch those professionals come in and really do what they do. It's really amazing to watch. You can find us on Twitter at HSEL Esports, on Facebook. Blanking on our what is our Facebook tag?
HSEL.org.
HSEL.org on Facebook. Our Discord, discord.gg/HSEL. And if you're watching this on YouTube after it has gone live, you can watch it live every Friday at 5 o'clock CST on twitch.tv/Varsity Network. Again, Aaron, Brett, thank you for coming on. I think we've had a very good conversation today.
Great. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks for coming on.